you so much for being here, Senator. We're going to start right away with a question from the audience right here in front.
Hi, Senator Booker. Thanks for being here. My name is Kay Marcel. People with disabilities in America. Is it working? Hello? Okay.
I'll repeat the question out there.
People with disabilities are living longer, and so are their parents, who are often the primary caregivers, as a result of advances in medicine and technology. My husband and I are in our 60s, and our son Joel is 40. More and more parents like me are reaching an age where providing daily care for a son or daughter is increasingly difficult, if not impossible. And we're also realizing that we're likely to need supportive care in the near future. What is your plan for addressing the direct support worker shortage to improve access to quality long-term care services so we can age in place?
Thank you very much. So to repeat the question everybody heard, this is a couple that's speaking to an issue that is going on for millions and millions of Americans who want to age in place, who want to be supportive, especially when it comes to long-term supportive care. And it's not just an issue for seniors, as they point out, it's also an issue for people, Americans with disabilities as well. And so this is something I know very personally because my dad had Parkinson's and Parkinson's onset dementia. And my mom was very isolated in having to deal with this challenge and deal with this crisis. And I, for the first time, had my eyes open wide to a lot of the challenges, financial, emotional, the difficulties. In fact, the AARP even has a report out that says it costs thousands of dollars, upwards of $7,000 on average, for families just to deal with the financial costs. And so I've come out with a very bold plan based upon my experiences to address these issues. The first thing is that we are a country that should value work. And folks who are staying home to take care of a person with disabilities or a person struggling, they should qualify for the Earned Income Tax Credit. And my plan actually expands that so that you will get more money, upwards of $4,000 in a credit, so that you can make sure that you have more money to be able to provide for your loved one. In addition to that, though, we have a system right now that's just unfair. It forces you to impoverish yourself in order to qualify for a lot of the Medicaid benefits. That, to me, is just unacceptable. And so my plan actually will expand the asset caps and even the income caps that you have so that middle income and low income Americans broadly can afford the kind of benefits from Medicaid if they want to go into a healthcare facility or even to have those advantages, those home support at home. And then finally, we need to be doing more to help people at home get help. And that means having qualified home health care aides. One of the biggest problems with the home health care system right now is attracting people into the profession and making sure that what makes that profession attractive is that we actually pay people wages that are positive and strong. We have people that come to our homes, I saw that with my mom, that do so much of the work that themselves are having to rely on food stamps and other public benefits just to make it. And a part of my plan is making sure that we have training and income increases for those workers too that do such important work. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Senator. You're an advocate of Medicare for all, and former Vice President Joe Biden today called for expanding the Affordable Care Act by adding a public option, which he says is more achievable than Medicare for all. How do you respond to that?
Well, I respond by saying, look, the reason why I'm for Medicare for all, the reason why I'm for this idea that in America healthcare should be a right is because right now we have a country that pays more for health care than any other country on the planet Earth. But we have the worst outcomes of all industrial nations. And so as a senator, I want to solve problems. I'm a former mayor of our state's largest city, and I just say there's lots of ways to get to my ultimate goal, which is everybody in this country having health care. And I'll tell you what, there's no way, even if we have 60 Democrats, that right away, I don't think it's likely that we're going to have some kind of massive transformation of our system. So as a former executive, I know you've got to take steps towards your goal. And my steps involve creating a robust public option. That way, if you change Medicare to make it, number one, better in its reimbursements, better in its funding, which is a lot of problems with Medicare as good as it is, if you lower Medicare eligibility down to 55, these are actually steps that could help small businesses. These are steps that are going to help more Americans move into Medicare. And you know what it's going to do to the private insurance plans? Especially if you have people 55 and older moving into Medicare, it's going to lower the cost of those pools. So I don't think the Vice President and I are going to quibble over what we're using as labels. If I am your president, on day one, I'm going to start doing things to repair the damage done to the Affordable Care Act from this president who's been going after it, and I'm going to make sure that we start the march towards getting more people access and driving down costs, because that's what Americans want. And I'm going to give you my biggest pain point in my neighborhood. One of the things driving the cost of Medicaid and Medicare, one of the things driving costs for families, is the cost of prescription drugs in our nation. And this, to me, and I have a feeling it's going to come up, and I won't give you all the tactics I'm going to use, but I'm just going to say this. If we can start driving down the overall costs, it's going to give us more of an ability to expand care. And that's what Americans are demanding, and I will meet that demand as your president.
One more quick follow-up on Medicare for All before we move on. There are existing problems under the Medicare system. Access to providers who will be available for people on Medicare, and also the reimbursement rate to those providers, especially in areas like Iowa. How do you avoid a Medicare for All plan making those existing problems worse?
Well, this is why, every American, I don't care what your party is, has the right to be skeptical of big, broad changes. And if you had to run the hospitals in my state, New Jersey, off of just Medicare reimbursements, most of our hospitals will probably have to end up closing. And that's why I say, let's take the next big step in my first Congress by saying we're going to address reimbursement issues in general, because some of the reimbursement problems are real and substantive. Let's expand the public option, because, by the way, why is Medicare better? In many ways, because its overhead costs are about 2%, while these private insurance companies, it's 15%. They really are profiting off of a system. What I want to show in my first Congress is that we can create an expanded public option that works for more people, that can probably, in some ways, outcompete a lot of the private insurers. Let's take that step, because it's not just hospitals that are complaining. I've had unions. The culinary union in Nevada said to me, we don't like Medicare for All because we negotiated for our benefits. We like the health care that we're getting. And that's why I'm saying, before we take tens of millions of people off of the health insurance that they like, let's show that we can create a viable, strong public option for all Americans and improve Medicare from where it is now.
Senator, let's discuss the role private insurance may have in your ideas. Medicare Advantage is private insurance, and about a third of the people who are on Medicare in this country use Medicare Advantage. Medicare Part D, the prescription drug benefit, is also the purchase of private insurance. Do you anticipate that would continue?
Yes, I absolutely do. And that first step.
Would you expand it?
I would. Look, there are a lot of aspects of Medicare Part D, Medicare Advantage that I think are very advantageous, and we should look at expanding, and frankly are working really well, and one of the reasons why people like it so much. And so, again, the first step has to be holding true to our common values and our common goals. And in this sense, my driving value will be getting to that point where every American is covered with a high quality of care. And so I, again, having been a chief executive during crisis, I will not let perfect be the enemy of good at a time that so many struggling Americans, when it comes to their prescription drug costs and it comes to their health care, desperately need more good. And that's why I'm keeping all options on the table as we begin to march towards my ultimate goal.
Okay, you mentioned the cost of prescription drugs. But let's talk about your record first. You voted against allowing the importation of prescription drugs from Canada in 2017, and some of your critics said you were too cozy with pharmaceutical companies that had donated to your last campaign. Were you wrong in that vote 2 years ago, and what's your plan today for reducing the cost of prescription drugs?
I'm really grateful for that question, because this is the kind of mess that's out there on the internet. I wasn't wrong for any of my votes. What is wrong is the things that have been said wrong about that night. Literally, there's a PolitiFact article out there that calls this into question, and there's an article literally entitled "The Stupid War on Cory Booker" over this, which was in no way a vote that would in any way have affected the importation of prescription drugs. The person that wrote the bill to allow importation safely from Canada as well as other countries is actually me. That's my legislation. I wrote it with Senator Casey and Senator Sanders. I've been supporting importation of prescription drugs since I was a mayor, and I had to fight, and won in some cases, to lower prescription drug costs. When I said this is a pain point for me, it is a pain point, because if you live like I live, in an inner city, low-income community, you see what so many seniors in this room know. Every day in America, people put aside their insulin because they can't afford it or ration it. They put aside life-saving prescription drugs because they can't afford it. And so I'm not only going to make sure that we open up pathways, like I'm the lead on the bill. If it gets done in America, it will be because of the legislation I wrote, but I'm going to do other things that are really important. Like number one, I'm going to take away patents from drug companies that raise the price of their drug in this country higher than they have it in other countries. It is absolutely outrageous when our tax dollars have put in the research necessary for private companies to often develop these drugs, and then they charge in this country 5x, 10x, 100 times what they're charging for the same drug in another nation. No more under my leadership. In addition to that, there are other actions that these pharmaceutical companies do that are just not wrong. There's one called pay to delay, where they try to pay off generics so that they don't develop a lower cost option. That's going to end. I think that the prescription drug companies that have been profiting off of our pain need to have a president that's not afraid to go after them, and that's why the last part of her question is really important. Before I even ran for president, long before that, I made a decision that I was not going to take campaign contributions from these C-suite pharma executives. I don't take corporate lobbyist money. I don't take corporate PAC money. I want to show you that, first of all, I believe you can't campaign wrong and then govern right. When I become the president of the United States, God willing, I will be someone that says to the pharmaceutical companies, I am going to be, if you're going to continue to do these unfair practices that hurt Americans, including what they've done with the opioid addiction problem, you're going to have a president that is not going to tolerate it. I'm going to come after you, hold you accountable, and ultimately make sure that we get justice in this country when it comes to health care.
Senator, you have embraced an idea called price indexing, where you would tie the price of pharmaceuticals in this country to the average of 5 sort of industrialized countries. How would that work? And the Trump administration has actually been considering this, but there's been big pushback, and they're not pushing forward because of opposition from the pharmaceutical industry, arguing it will hamper research and development.
Well, these are the lies that are being told. If it works for Germany, England, Japan, all the countries and others that are looking at price indexing or do price indexing, it has not hurt their profits and their profit margins in terms of their ability to exist and ability to do research. And you and I both know that a lot of the research is often done by smaller companies that are designing these drugs and then are bought up by the bigger companies. This is just a lie. You do not need to profiteer off people's pain in order to run a good business, and that's what's happening right now. Think about this. Insulin in our country in the last 10 years has gone up 300%, the cost of insulin. There was a critical cancer drug that in this country that they just racked up over 100% to take advantage of those folks who needed it. The kind of stories that are going on, they're often actually not the company that develops the drug. Sometimes these smaller companies buy out that drug just so they can jack up the prices and profiteer off our pain. Why do we allow those things to happen and other nations don't? If Donald Trump doesn't have the guts to stand up to the pharmaceutical companies, then elect me, because I most certainly will.
Senator, let's shift our discussion to Social Security. In 2013, you tweeted that you oppose benefit cuts, but you support expanding Social Security benefits.
Yes.
How do you do both of those things given the financial reality of the system as it currently exists?
Right, and so this is another thing that people tell you, that Social Security is broken and it's not viable. And I just simply say this: look, we are a nation that believes fundamentally in fairness. And so why should somebody who's making $70,000 a year, a family that's making $80,000, $90,000, $100,000 a year, pay so much more in terms of percentage of their income in Social Security taxes than someone who's making $5 million a year? Social Security is a regressive tax hurting working class Americans, and then we cry poverty that we don't have the resources to keep it solvent. If I am your president, I'm going to say we're going to make this tax far more just and fair, and that the highest earners in this country are going to have to pay more. We're going to have to lift the cap, and it'll affect a very small percentage of people in order to be able to not only make Social Security solvent, but this is the thing that really worries me. Here in Iowa, across our country, there are millions of seniors who've worked hard all of their lives and are being stripped of their dignity because their Social Security checks are so meager that they are below the poverty line. we need to be a country that values the dignity of all people, and a simple adjustment for high-income earners affecting a very small percentage of our country would not only fix Social Security, but it would elevate the salaries, as I will do, elevate the income, the Social Security checks of all Americans so that everyone can retire with dignity and security.
I want to be clear. One of your competitors have said completely eliminate the cap. You would raise it rather than eliminate it.
I would raise the cap for the highest income earners. I think that's all that we need to do. That alone would allow me to do my two goals, which is make it solvent for generations to come, and take so many of the people that we have right now who are below the poverty line, at the poverty line, or a little bit above. It would be able to give a boost, an expansion of benefits for millions and millions of American seniors, giving them what we all should have in our retirement, which is security and dignity.
Let's talk a little bit about age discrimination. Senators Chuck Grassley from Iowa and Democrat Bob Casey introduced legislation aimed at making it easier for workers to sue employers for age discrimination. Do you support the Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act? And what else should be done to ensure equal opportunity for people over 40 in the workforce?
Yeah, so I haven't read the bill, so I always am cautioning myself there might be something in there. But the ideals behind that bill, I not only support them, but we must make them law. Because age discrimination happens all throughout our country in every single industry. And I've seen that people that I know have lost their job mid-career and go back to interview for a job that they're incredibly qualified for. But somehow that interviewer behind the desk looks at them and thinks, oh, I don't want you here just because of your age. That discrimination is discrimination in this country. And we should have laws to protect against that. And we should give people the power to use the legal system for what it should be used, not just the rich and powerful, but to make sure everybody gets a fair shake.
One of the AARP lobbying points is they would like to forbid employers from asking prospective employees their age. Is that something that you would support?
Look, my mom was an HR executive for IBM. And when I finally had to run a city, I had thousands of employees. My mom and I would often talk. I learned so much about managing big, in fact, we got very efficient. We cut our size of our government 25%, made it a lot more efficient. But my mom used to always tell me, if I ever find that you are asking somebody's age in an interview, you'll have a problem with me. And so you should not be allowed to ask somebody's age. I think that is, unless it's for some reason something germane that I'm not imagining, but I think that practice opens up a door for people to discriminate against you because of your age.
Also, there's AARP data on a different topic. It appears that about 9 out of 10 older Americans access the internet regularly. I know that may be a shocker.
Trust me, my mom is on the internet all the time. And I tell her on these articles, Mom, don't read the comments on the articles. That's where all the negative stuff is.
And 83% of the folks surveyed have a smartphone. The problem is they may live in a zone that's sort of broadband, high-speed internet free. How do you, as president, sort of fix this problem where there are certainly haves and have-nots in this country? Okay,
I want you to say that when she says broadband internet free, she's not talking about free internet. No. She's talking about not having universal broadband. I mean, this should be something that also ticks everybody in this room off. We see our competitors around the world having near universal broadband from South Korea to countries in Europe. You know why? Because they know, not just for elders in our society, but for our kids. Here in Iowa, the fact that we don't have a rural infrastructure plan that includes universal access to high-speed internet and broadband is unconscionable to me. And so for me, there is an urgency in doing this, and I'm going to make sure that we get our country back to the 21st century, because a lot of folks in this room know that this was never a partisan issue before. Having the #1 infrastructure on the planet Earth, which what we had, was done by a generation of Americans that say we invest in each other. That's where the Eisenhower Highway Act came from. A Republican president. That's worth $1 trillion in today's money. But guess what we did, my generation did to the inheritance from our parents? We've trashed it. And we're about to hand over to our kids trillions of dollars of infrastructure deficit because we haven't kept up the house. That's got to end. We've got to invest again in the critical things. China just built 18,000 miles of high-speed rail. And the busiest rail corridor in North America runs half an hour slower than it did in the 60s. We should be ashamed of ourselves. And so from the electrical grid to a resiliency, to stop flooding and other problems, to the kind of access to technology and information that the internet gives, I'm going to be the infrastructure president. I know that's not sexy, but it is critical for us to lead again on the planet Earth, and that's what I intend to do.
Do you raise the gas tax? Do you raise a fee on cell phone bills? How do you pay for that infrastructure?
All right, so this is the best question to ask a former mayor that couldn't print more money to solve my budget problems. I couldn't shut down my government because I don't get along with my city council. And I was in the middle of a budget deficit. We had massive budget holes. We have to govern better in the United States of America. More Democrats need to say that. We need to stop the waste that we have going on in our government. And you know what a lot of the waste is? The waste is not having somebody take their insulin drugs so they end up because they can't afford them, and they end up in the hospital emergency room. There's so much waste baked into our healthcare system because we have a system that's designed for treating people after things get really bad as opposed to investing when things get good. And we just did common sense government. So to this question about paying for infrastructure, well, you know that Democratic presidents, if you look at the last 4 or 5 presidents, where deficits went up under Bush, under this president, now blowing $1 trillion annually in our deficits. You know where deficits went down? Under Democratic presidents, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama. Why? Because we are not dead set on doing what Donald Trump just did with his Trump tax cuts. You know where that money went? It didn't go into the pockets of working Americans. He gave tax cuts to the wealthiest of the wealthy and corporations. If we just roll back those Trump tax cuts, those toxic Trump tax cuts, we will have hundreds of billions of dollars, trillions of dollars to invest in the priorities of this country. And guess what happens when you invest in infrastructure? When you give money to corporations that use it for stock buybacks that juices up the stock market, I don't know if you all knew that 1/3 of our stock market is owned by people outside of our country. When you use your tax dollars to invest in infrastructure, guess what you do? For every dollar invested in infrastructure, it increases our economy 100%. You get a full 100% return. We used to, in the time of Eisenhower, invest in the things that grow your economy: education, infrastructure, research and development. This president is pulling back on all of those things. If I am president, we're going to pay for the things that I'm talking about by running government more efficiently, by reversing these toxic Trump tax cuts, and investing in the things that grow our economy, like infrastructure and education.
Some economists have warned that the U.S. is facing a pension time bomb with over $3.8 trillion in public pension debt, public pension alone in 2016. What would you do as president to address this looming crisis?
Well, first of all, especially here in the Midwest, there's a few particular pension problems with some incredible unions that have had bad management on their pensions, and there's a few bills, mostly supported by Democrats, to save these pension funds. And a lot of people say, well, there's a moral hazard in that, that's not right. But these are the same people that were very happy to sign on to bail out Wall Street, and they don't want to bail out some of these pension funds. So I think in this crisis, at the end of the day, this is about people. And my grandfather worked, as a union assembly line worker, UAW worker, worked his whole career. I would never want to see my grandfather or anybody's grandfather not have a pension because people who manage those pension funds made terrible mistakes. There's a role for the federal government in dealing with this crisis, but there's a larger crisis brewing that's more than just some of these public pension plans that are in crisis. The larger problem is that we are a nation, and I watched it happen when my parents were working for their company, that we went from defined benefit to defined contribution. And what a lot of Americans don't realize right now is they may think they're saving for retirement, but especially as longevity gets greater, they don't have the resources that they need. This is a whistle we should be blowing now, because we see right now the number of Americans over 65, by the time of 2050, that number will have more than doubled. We are an aging society, and we need to have a plan to deal with retirement security. And that's why a lot of the things that I'm working on, not only as a senator, but the plans I have as a president, will address this retirement problem by having portable benefits, by having more secure pension funds, by having more public investment units that people can invest in that can augment things like Social Security.
Okay, and this is the last question. Do you want to go ahead, Kay?
Senator, reverse mortgages are an option for many folks. Does the industry need more regulation?
I'm sorry my parents told me to watch my language, but hell yes. This is what really frustrated me is I lived in a city where I saw lots of terrible schemes of people trying to take advantage of my seniors, of my elders in my community. And there are so many people trying to prey on the insecurity and the needs of senior citizens. This is an area where we need to recognize as a problem and have not only regulation, but I'm going to have a DOJ that's going to go after these bad examples and make examples of them time and time again.
And Senator,
Yes.
I can recognize the clock. It looks like your time may be expiring. Do you have a few sentences to leave with the folks?
Yeah, my biggest sentence is more of a general issue in this campaign. And you see it from these horrific language that the president was using about other Americans today from the Rose Garden. We need to understand that we are each other's bond. We are each other's harvest. As a poet once said, we are each other's best hope. If we rip this country apart along partisan lines, racial lines, you name it, we are going to do and fall into the trap that Lincoln talked about, a house divided cannot stand. I am in this race not just to beat Donald Trump, I'm in this race to do more than that, to unite this nation and bring us to higher ground, because I'll tell you, the best way to beat Donald Trump is not to fight him on his turf and his tactics using the way he goes about it. I'm going to fight to unite this nation, to have a revival of civic grace, for have more courageous empathy, to let people understand that we need to create a more beloved society. If we can do that, we not only will get a demagogue out of the White House, but we're going to unite our country where our strength is so that we have the power to make sure that we have more justice and fairness in our society. And in the 50-year anniversary of us coming together as a nation to put a person on the moon, I'm going to promise you this: elect me president, I will help to unite this country so that we again in the next generation can defy gravity. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you very much.